Hello Internet, and welcome to my live reaction for Fire Force Chapter 275. When we last left our heroes, Sho and Fairy had their, final battle. As Sho tried to make an attack on Fairy, and then Fairy revealed that with the Doppel so close, using some of his gravity magic, he can also stop time. It's all kind of... it's only slightly less pseudoscience-y as the rest of Fairy's powers, but it's still pretty pseudoscience-y. Either way, that does not actually stop Sho from dealing a fatal blow to Fairy. And Fairy, realizing he's kind of does not have a chance at surviving this, summons the rest of the Cataclysm Force, and they commit a mass suicide to summon powerful doppelgangers of the establishment that we know contain Benimaru, Kurono, and Burns. And then there were two other we couldn't see. One, I thought might be Nataku. Someone in the comments of the last video said it could be Assault. But I think, Nataku isn't super important, so I wouldn't particularly consider him a member of the establishment. But I consider him, more important than Assault. So I'm not sure, so I'm not quite sure on that note. And then a fifth person who I just completely do not recognize. But yeah, powerful doppelgangers are on their way. And we'll see how everything shakes up. Our picture here, though, is of Shinra in an I Love Tokyo shirt, kind of squinting at the viewer. Hey you, do you love Tokyo? Chapter 275, The Reaper Sneers. So this is going to be a Kurono chapter, we can pretty much say with certainty. Our little note here, Volume 29 is out in Japan and Volume 23 is out overseas. Please make sure you are supporting the official release as much as you can. We then have our scan later page. And another, I think this is another note from Sojami. This is a reminder that Scanlation is a purely fan-curated project and can drastically impact the sales of a series, especially when there's no simulpub. So please, please, please ensure you are supporting the official release of Fire Force. It's crucial that where possible, you do your part to support the industry and the original creator. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Basic stuff, yeah. If you have money, and you like the series, go out and buy it. But anyway, we open on Benimaru, who's still kind of just sort of sitting there. After last time we saw him was 6 or so chapters ago. As a new despair emerges, what is Benimaru doing in Asakusa? And Benimaru is kind of meditating, eyes closed, and he slowly opens his eyes. He gets up and he kind of looks around, and he has this image. I think he's seeing this of him on one side on a white background, and another him on a black background, a wall of flames dividing them, clearly emblematic of his soon-to-be-arriving doppelganger. And Conro walks up behind him. Benny. Yeah, it's like you said, Conro. And Conro, weirdly enough, mispronounces the word, a doppelganger, which just doesn't really seem in character for Conro. He's always had this kind of, stoic vibe. And it's Benimaru who kind of corrects him. A doppelganger. Right. And then we cut back to the aftermath of the Cataclysm Force's mass suicide. As Sho kind of looks at them. He said there'd be doppelgangers of powerful establishment members. And he flashes back to, what Fairy just did, so kind of bloodied from his fatal wound. We of the Cataclysm Force shall give our lives to call the doppelgangers. And I don't quite know how their suicide did that, though it's also kind of similar in concept, maybe, to Arthur back in 272, his final act being calling out to Shinra and that summoning Shinra from the pillar. So maybe there is a connection there. I don't know. But Sho kind of realizes they're here. And we see 4, orbs coming, falling from the sky. Though remember, there should be 5 members. And they kind of hit the ground, around Tokyo. Sho watches from the rooftop and looks up at the sky again. And he sees even more coming. 3 more come and they hit the ground. The citizens kind of are running from this new bombardment. What on earth is happening? I thought the cataclysm was dying down. And then they know, look there, that's the destroyer of Asakusa. And yep, there is doppelganger Benimaru. Interestingly, the X pattern in his eye is reversed. With the real Benimaru, he's got like the kind of what would be a normal eye, like irises and pupils, but just a white X over the iris. Whereas here on page 10, when we see on the bottom of page 10, it's actually just whereas real Benny's eye is just the X is just covering the iris, here it's covering the entire eye. Which maybe, we see this image of even on the top of the page, Benny's eyes in silhouette, we just see the glowing white ring and the glowing white X. Or just the white ring and white X. You don't really know if they're glowing, it's artistic license and all. But maybe that's the image that people have of Benny. And so they see him, and so the doppelganger of Benny has a full eye covering X, because that's how people see him. Also, of course, the people of Tokyo at large see him as both kind of anti-Tokyo and a destructive force. So I'm sure that's going to play into Benny. Shinra, though, has kind of stopped the moon. He's landed on a ceiling, on a roof somewhere, and Sho lands behind him. Brother! And Shinra calls to him, let me guess, it's not over. The Cataclysm Force martyred themselves to summon new doppelgangers. And Shinra then kind of tells him, then let's stop them together. And Sho hands him something. You need to do what only you can do, brother. And what's that supposed to be? And then we look up, and we see the eye dome, that's still sort of, been split in two, by Arthur, but it's, like, the two halves are still, like, touching each other. It's still up. It's just taking some serious damage. Put an end to things with the holy maiden Haumea and the Evangelist. Only the Savior can do that. And Shinra, despite the fact that I don't think he knows about all the Savior drama that Sho kind of uncovered, 40 or so chapters ago, he looks back at Sho and smiles. You really are my guardian angel. And Sho tells him everything, including our mother. It all awaits in Adola. And Shinra says, right, we can't afford to go losing the place Arthur's coming back to. And so here's an interesting thing. I want to talk about put an end to things with Haumea as well, but also that line, the place Arthur's coming back to. Because how much does Shinra know about what's happened? I can see, like, maybe Shinra might know that Arthur went to space. Because Arthur called to Shinra, and that's what woke Shinra up. And so maybe Shinra is aware of where Arthur was. Does he... But if he has that much knowledge, how much other knowledge does he have? Does he know that Arthur is dead? No one else knows that. But if he does know, then the fact that he says that Arthur's coming back to this place implies that he knows that... I mean, people have theorized Arthur coming back via doppelganger. And that seems to be kind of the best option to kind of simultaneously not dilute Arthur's dying sacrifice and simultaneously bring Arthur back to the story because everyone loves Arthur. So that's kind of the question. What does Shinra know? And I don't really have the information here to kind of theorize beyond that. I also want to talk about this line, put an end to things with the Evangelist, but also the Holy Maiden Haumea. Defeating Haumea, according to Sho, is sort of a big part of ending the Cataclysm. And I want to talk about something I don't think I've talked about before, but a theory I've had about Haumea for a while. Basically since we learned the full extent of her powers. That she sees all of the world's emotions and it's all negative. Because, A, that's about as unshonen a take as it comes. And so, B, my theory is, what if the Evangelist is personally filtering out all positive emotions? And I think the one strike against that theory is Charon's unconditional love scene, and back in, I think it was 250, which is, a great moment, but also is proof that she can read positive emotions, but for some reason she doesn't from the world at large, despite the fact that the world at large does have positive emotions. My point being is, if the Evangelist is hiding the world's positive emotions, at least on a macro scale, not on a micro scale, but at least on that macro scale from Haumea, and Haumea learns that, how is she going to react? Because I think it might be possible Haumea, enraged at the Evangelist for kind of forcing her into this insanity her entire life, maybe could turn on her. And it requires a lot of different things to be right. But I think Haumea, if things turn out in a very specific way, could end up kind of playing a turncoat. Which would not, of course, kind of diminish the horrible things she's done, but would be learning that the Evangelist forced her into her insanity is all the motivation you really need to sort of justify a face turn like that. Either way, all that said, let's move on. Can't afford to go losing the place Arthur's coming back to. Let's protect this world show. It'll be the final battle of this story. And so there we see again that sort of meta language that's largely been kind of kept with Victor, and I think Sumire as well, is now being picked up by Shinra. And I mean, Fire Force has kind of very much become a sort of meta text at this point, and I'm all for it, of course. But it is interesting that idea is kind of spreading to characters who haven't really had conversations with Victor. I guess it's possible that Shinra in the Pillar kind of picked up on Sumire's thought processes and kind of has that language now. I don't know. It's all very interesting. Anyway, we open on Nataku, who I guess has also been freed of the Pillar now, falling from the sky. Wah! Ah! And at the last second, he kind of catches himself. Or either Nataku has been freed from the Pillar, or this is Doppel Nataku. Both are possible options, because we did see the doppelgangers falling from the sky, which could very well be Nataku. Possibly. But Nataku looks around. What the heck freed me from a Dola? So maybe this is well, actually, that could be either way. That still could be a doppelganger. Because the doppelgangers are in a Dola, and even though the pillars are kind of in the real world, when we saw them at the beginning of the arc, they seemed to be in a Dola. So maybe they thought they were in a Dola, but they actually weren't. So it's still really unclear. Is this the doppelganger, or is this the real Nataku? Either way, Nataku looks up and he sees the eye. Oh boy, this world's still connected to the thought world of a Dola. So yeah, it's still, nothing is really quite clear. Though I will say, it's interesting that the eye dome is not cut in half here. We don't have that cutting line we saw back on page 12. I don't know. Anyway, Nataku looks around. Well, first off, I should probably find somebody. There's been explosions going off for a while. This area is still in chaos. Have Shinra and the other pillars been released? Okay, so there he very much seems to be aware. I think this is the real Nataku. The fact that he says, have they been released, and the other pillars, I think is kind of including him in that note. I'm assuming this is the real Nataku. Especially because the Doppel Nataku is not really connected to the pillar. Wouldn't have any reason to think that anyone has been released. So this is the real Nataku, is my guess. But anyway, Nataku looks around. Kurono-san! I need to find Kurono-san! He is going to find the doppelganger, which will finally cut us into our chapter title, The Reaper Sneers. Sneers. Anyway, Nataku Kurono looks up, and he sees Kurono. Either the real one or the doppelganger, anyone's guess. Kurono-san! And he runs up to him. This is perfect! Were you looking for me too? I will say, though, the Kurono-Nataku relationship is really kind of uncomfortable. And so I imagine people not being fans of the fact that Nataku is so excited to find Kurono. Either way, Kurono just stands there, because he's probably the doppelganger, and he leans back and smacks Nataku. Which, again, could be either of them at this point. Nataku kind of hits the ground, And Kurono looks at him. I sure was, Takun. And Kurono, or not Kurono, Nataku sort of looks at him. Who are you? Who? I'm Kurono. You didn't forget about your Uncle Death, did you? No. Kurono never sneers like that. And Doppel Kurono tells him that's not true at all. The real Kurono is a degenerate. There's no way he'd sneer like that when he was bullying someone. To him, bullying the weak is totally natural. There's nothing funny about it. God, this relationship is so fucking weird. Smiling like that when you bully someone is proof you know you're doing something bad. You're just a lame faker, pretending to be a degenerate. There's a lot of layers going on here. There's a lot of layers in this relationship I don't particularly want to unpack. But yeah, this does sort of seem to be the doppelganger Kurono, which means this is kind of how people see Kurono. The world at large, or the very least people who know this aspect of Kurono's personality, thinks he's having fun. Whereas Nataku seems to think that it's just natural for him. And Nataku, I suppose, would know best. You're just a lame faker, pretending to be a degenerate. And he readies his flames. You're not Kurono. Nataku. You're such a clever boy. Kurono kind of grins. But there's still so much you don't understand. The world doesn't care if you're real or fake. There's nothing strange about people's perception of a thing replacing the original. People accept shallow imitations all the time, right? To be continued in chapter 276, Imitation. There's no ending blurb here, though. I don't know if that's just a kind of, it was sort of forgotten on the translator's side of things, or if it's just wasn't there in the original. But anyway, let's talk about this final line, because it's weird. The world doesn't care if you're real or fake. There's nothing strange about people's perception of a thing replacing the original. People accept shallow imitations all the time, right? It's that middle sentence is kind of piquing my interest. Because if the Doppel Kurono replaces Kurono, could this be both the real Kurono and the Doppel Kurono? And it wouldn't quite be the first time we've seen that. Because thinking back to 216, when Shinra had his kind of 6-month coma after seeing the pre-Cataclysm world, he was replaced by people's perception of him. By the Doppel Shinra. So what if something similar is happening here? I don't know. I really don't know. Like, I guess it's a possibility. I don't know what that would lead. I don't know. I'm really confused. I'm there's a lot to consider here, and I want the next chapter. That's the answer. I want the next chapter so I can work out what's going on with Kurono. But I think it's an interesting idea that what's going on with Kurono is the same thing that happened to Shinra a year ago. He's been replaced by the doppelganger. The doppelganger is now inside Kurono's body in a weird way, much like what happened to Shinra. After the time travel bit. Anyway, let's talk about the chapter. Let's talk about the rest of the chapter. We get a little bit of Benny sort of setting up the Benny fight, as Doppel Benny is now somewhere in Tokyo. Doesn't quite seem to be in Asakusa, because we see a little bit. I'm assuming these two panels at the bottom of page 9 are the same location. It's the same kind of passerby, same kind of background characters talking. And the buildings there don't look like the traditional Japanese buildings we see in Asakusa. So Benny seems to have landed somewhere in Tokyo, outside of Asakusa. I think Asakusa is a part of Tokyo. But yeah. So maybe that's just because, the Doppel Benny, the perception of Benny, wants to just destroy Tokyo, destroy the empire. So he's landed in a more imperial part of town. But yeah, that'll be coming sooner rather than later, I think. But also a little bit later, I do think we're going to focus on Kurono first. We get a little bit of Sho and Shinra as they sort of announce their intention to finish things. That it's time for Shinra to sort of wrap things up. Also, one thing I did not note is the little the thing that Sho hands Shinra is a t-shirt. Because Shinra is not wearing a shirt at first. And then, starting on page 12, we see he's wearing, like, a plain t-shirt. Nice little detail there. But yeah, then we focus on what seems to be the next part of the story. Nataku versus Kurono. And again, Kurono and Nataku's relationship is so fucking weird. And really uncomfortable that I don't particularly want to dive into it. I feel like I kind of have to. It's sort of in my job description to dive into it. But yeah, as we saw kind of back in Haijima, Nataku likes not having to be strong. Kurono likes him not being strong because he can bully him. And, like, I understand the comfort of, like, not having to be strong. I'm well aware of that sensation. But it's just the way Kurono does that to abuse Nataku is the thing that always kind of rubs people the wrong way. The more interesting thing, of course, being that Doppel Kurono is perhaps inside Kurono, much like what we saw with Shinra way back when. And that seems to be the focus of next chapter. The question I have to ask, though, is that we never quite found out how Shinra retook Doppel Shinra. You know, from Shinra's perspective, he saw the past with Inca, and then he woke up and it was 6 months later. And so we don't quite know what happened to kind of oust Doppel Shinra, and so we don't really know what Nataku can do to oust Doppel Kurono, if that even happens, if Kurono does not just die. I don't know. It's a lot of questions going on here, and I want to see where Okubo is going with all this. And I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. Fire Force really just always is. So yeah, I'm going to leave this video off here. Hope you all enjoyed the chapter and the video itself. If you did, feel free to drop me a like or subscribe. You know, do whatever makes you happy, you know? And remember, your life is your own, okay? Bye!